What is going on, everybody? PennLive Blue White Breakdown here. Max Ralph alongside Johnny McGonigal. We're doing a little bit of a special pod today. This is something we've been talking about doing, I think, ever since the preseason, Johnny, and we're actually going to do it today. So that's pretty exciting. We reached out to our subtext subscribers. If you haven't heard about that, it is a platform where you can literally get text from us on your phone. It's pretty cool. We chat with you guys a couple times a week, send some updates when we learn things before putting them onto social media or on the PennLive website. And now this week, we're doing a little bit of a mailbag pod with it, and maybe do that every week moving forward. So if you haven't, you should subscribe. I highly recommend it. But Johnny, how are we doing this morning? Afternoon.
Yeah, afternoon. Yeah, we're just past noon, so we're into the afternoon. No, I'm doing well, man. A train just rolled by outside my place. Hopefully, no more come through. I know you said that there's some fire alarms maybe going on, like some fire drills going off in your building. So
Yeah.
hopefully we don't get any of that going on. We already had the dinging
Yeah.
notifications issue on Monday. Apologies to the listeners for that. We've got that sorted out, and that won't that won't pop up quite literally again in the next podcast. We're here for you guys, and we're here to talk some Penn State football, Penn State USC, like you mentioned, Ralph. Ralph.
Hey, I've been called Ralph by football coaches, friends, strangers for
Yeah,
my entire life, so it doesn't bother me.
I'm the same way. People call me McGonigal all the time. Even freshman football, a few guys called me Professor because of the whole Harry Potter deal, Professor
Okay.
McGonagall, and
Yep.
I had never seen Harry Potter until really like a
Hmm.
few years ago. So the joke just went way over my head.
Sure.
But you've got some questions that you've fielded from subtext, Max, and I'm ready and eager to get to them.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so let's start out. This was the only one we got that didn't have a name attached to it, but it's a topic that a lot of people have been talking about, whether it's on social media, whether it's literally James Franklin. But these slow starts, Penn State is kind of struggled on both sides of the ball. Sometimes it feels like the offense gets going early on, but the defense doesn't, or it's the other way around. So it's just kind of, let's just dive into that really quickly and say, what has been the cause of that, in your opinion, Johnny? And is there anything that Penn State has to do this weekend to get it fixed?
Yeah, I mean, let's just look at the UCLA game, Max, from an offensive standpoint, starting off really slow. And I don't think it's necessarily a game script issue. I think it's just
Hmm.
an execution issue on the part of, Drew and the wide receiver, sometimes the offensive line, sometimes, procedural penalties have come into play earlier in the season. I mean, you look at the UCLA game, and I mean, Drew just barely, he missed Fleming on an open route. And watching it from the press box, we couldn't tell at the time, was Julian supposed to sit down on that route? Was he supposed to sit in the zone? Was that the route he was supposed to run? So just some, maybe some miscommunications early, which is not when you would expect to have them, because these coaches, these players spend all week, that first game script, coming out and deciding how they want to attack a defense and having a pretty good idea of a 10 to 12 play script. And so maybe it's just getting in with Andy Kotelnicki and the rest of the offensive unit and getting more on the same page there. But it's kind of, from an offensive standpoint, it's kind of inexcusable to start off that slow. And so it is an issue, and one they need to work out, especially this weekend against USC. With a passing game that hasn't been totally on point and totally explosive as much as maybe some people thought it would be this season, but still a team that can hurt you, and you never want to go down early on the road.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. When I was rewatching the game this week, those play action shots were there. There were two times in that first quarter on early drives for Penn State and it was Fleming both times. Aller and Fleming just not on the same page. The sit down, or Aller underthrew Fleming once. The shots were there. I think the plays are getting open. It's just as simple as you miss one throw and you might end up with a 3-and-out. It's not what you're going to want this week, because USC is a pretty high-powered offense. So Penn State's got to get going early. I think on the defensive side of the ball, you and I and Bob sitting in the press box during the game, we all kind of commented on it, and I think the rewatch kind of reaffirmed what we saw. Is Penn State was playing too much zone in the first half against Justin Martin last week. I think maybe they were caught by surprise by how well he was able to handle it because he'd only thrown 5 passes in his career. They thought maybe, okay, we can blitz play zone in the back end and just kind of confuse his eyes. He won't know what he's looking at. That's not what happened. He picked it apart and made good throws. And then in the second half, they played a lot more man, and the blitzes got home. That's kind of exactly the takeaway from the game. And I think that's kind of been a thing throughout the year for Penn State is that Tom Allen has liked to play a little more zone and kind of try and trick offenses to begin the games, and it hasn't quite worked out. So I think that's kind of where things are coming from. I'm going to have to be careful because those USC wide receivers are capable of beating man coverage this week. So I do think Penn State's going to play more man again, but that's where the slow start had come from, at least this past week. I do expect to see more man coverage early on, but they're going to have to play a little bit of both to disguise things. But I do think when you're going on the road like this, you have to be able to blitz and get to Miller Moss early on in order for things to work out. So that's kind of where things are coming from, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and just a couple things to add on that really quick, Max.
Yeah.
I know we have other questions to get to, but just
Yeah,
credit
yeah.
to Justin. Justin Martin, the quarterback for UCLA, a kid who, like you mentioned, only had 5 passing attempts coming into last weekend's game, and I thought he played with a lot of poise, even throughout the entire game when he was getting blitzed like hell in the second half. But finding his tight end over the middle in zone early, Zaki Wheatley ends up with that 4th down stop to stymie the initial drive. But you talk about game scripts, and the other team does them too. I thought Illinois had a good game script to start, a couple weeks back. And so I would expect the same from Miller Moss and USC. So Tom Allen and that defense has to be on their P's and Q's this weekend to start and not just to finish.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into another one. This is a good one that kind of tracks with what we were talking about with Andy Kotelnicki. So we had Randy Teeters from Ohio, another Ohio guy. So shout out there. But yeah, so why hasn't Andy Kotelnicki? The question was essentially why hasn't he used as many plays as we saw at Kansas, and maybe not motioning a ton. What I'll say to that is, but before I turn it over to you, Johnny, is that I do think we've seen a lot from Kansas. Honestly, we haven't necessarily seen some of the stuff he did with 2 quarterbacks on the field last year. There were a lot of option plays. I'm trying to think. I think there were even tunnel screens to quarterbacks, double throws, whatever. But if you look back to that Venga Ioane motion and hit like that was something he did at Kansas. I think on the motion topic as well, like maybe they're not doing a ton of like come across the formation motion, but Penn State is doing a lot of stemming. Like they'll line up in one formation and then all of a sudden every guy in the backfield will flip and turn into something else. Like they've put Tyler Warren in the backfield and split him out. They've lined up Katron Allen out wide and brought him back into the backfield. So I do think that we're seeing probably the amount of motion that we were expecting with Andy Kotelnicki, but maybe I do think it's fair. There's probably more in that playbook that we haven't seen.
Definitely. And I think on that note, when you talk about what Penn State has coming up, not just this weekend, but this stretch of games coming up at USC, then, bye week at Wisconsin, Ohio State at home, Washington at home for the whiteout, a 4-game stretch that ultimately will decide, at least in the regular season, how we view this 2024 season for Penn State. Knowing how important that stretch is, wouldn't be surprised if Andy Kotelnicki is saving some of that stuff for USC, for specifically Ohio State. You see it across the country too. I mean, watching Ohio State this year, Chip Kelly, those guys have been pretty vanilla all year, and I would expect Ohio State maybe running the ball a little bit more with Will Howard, big game upcoming this weekend against Oregon, that they're going to show some things that they haven't shown. We saw it Alabama against Georgia. Alabama didn't go empty set really all season, and then they surprised Georgia in the first half. Doing something that Georgia was not repping, was not practicing against, and Alabama ended up getting a 30-7, halftime lead and holding on. So I think there's something to that when you have a smart offensive coordinator like Andy Kotelnicki, who knows what he's doing, who has a bunch of tricks up his sleeve, that when you're playing against UCLA, and I know Illinois is a little tighter than maybe some would have hoped, but Kent State, I don't think they thought that Bowling Green was going to be as tight of a game as it was. But when you have the schedule to open the season like Penn State did, I think it's fair to keep some of those tricks in the bag and then pull them out later in the year when teams like USC least expect it.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance of doing things like having Tyler Warren out of the Wildcat or, running Bo Prabula out of the slot and like putting those things on film to prepare for, but then keeping enough out of those formations or enough different formations so that you're not putting everything on film. And you're exactly right. I mean, there's a tough stretch of this schedule coming up here. So I think I hope that answered your question, Randy. We'll move on to the next one here. This is from John Kelly in Boalsburg. He wants to dive into those two former 5-star top Pennsylvania prospects who have made their way back home, in Julian Fleming and Nolan Rucci, and just kind of discuss, Johnny, what has maybe led to them not quite living up to that 5-star potential. Obviously, they've both had plenty of time in college football at this point, so now that they're at Penn State, what are the things that have maybe held them back from contributing in the way that we expected so far this year? If you want to start with one or the other, maybe we could start with Julian first and then tackle Nolan next.
Yeah, I was going to go with Nolan first,
then go with Nolan first. Yeah, no,
go with Nolan because I think Nolan Rucci, who was a 5-star coming out of Warwick, goes to Wisconsin. He could have a big role this weekend if Anthony Donko can't go. We saw Anthony Donko, the starting right tackle, leave the game with an injury, go into the medical tent after the second drive against UCLA. Max, we're recording this Wednesday afternoon. You'll be at practice tonight, so I'm sure you'll have all eyes on Big Anthony, seeing if he's out there.
He's at the top of my list.
At the top of your list, he should be. And if Nolan Rucci has to go, if Anthony can't play and Nolan Rucci is thrust into that right tackle spot, it's going to be a tough challenge. It's going to be a challenge for him. We saw him struggle in pass protection, losing on speed against UCLA, being thrust into that role when Donko went down. And so I think, with him coming in, he always had the size in terms of the height and everything, but he needed to add some weight, needs to get a little more nimble, I think. And so that's my read on Nolan, at least. And, there's still a lot of clay to mold there. And I don't necessarily think that, what he is right now is what he's going to continue to be for his Penn State career. But he's got to improve, and all these guys have to improve. Julian the same way. I mean, I don't know if you have some thoughts you want to share on Julian, Max, but I think this is kind of the role that, obviously when you're a 5-star guy and you're a Pennsylvania guy and you come over from Ohio State, everyone starts talking about being a 1,000-yard receiver, fulfilling that potential. And I mean, we talked about it too. Like, that was obviously a possibility, but you look at what he put on film over 4 years at Ohio State. This is kind of the receiver that he's been throughout his collegiate career.
Yeah, I think you bring up good points with both of them. Rucci is, we don't know. He could be the guy this week, but he's been in a lot of games this year. I mean, they're trying to get him involved. They're trying to get him on-field experience. They know that he could be an important piece for the remaining eligibility he has too, not even just this year. And he has put that weight on. I mean, it's helped. He had some snaps when rewatching that UCLA game. He had some snaps where he looked really, really good, especially in the run game. I mean, he's a people mover. He's a big body. He knows how to throw his weight around. When defensive ends have tried to rush him straight on, he's handled it pretty well. But he does kind of struggle with that speed rush. There's a couple times where he's just off balance. He's an unfinished product, but I think that all of the pieces of that 5-star potential are showing at times with Nolan. And I think he's a guy that you can remain patient with and kind of take the progress as it goes. Julian's obviously in a little bit of a different scenario because he's in his last year of college football. But I think what he's had so far is kind of the role we were expecting for him. I mean, like you said, you look at what he put on film at Ohio State, and what film there was. Because remember, this guy has been through a lot in the injury front. He's had multiple surgeries. He's not the same athlete that he was when he was coming out of high school, and that's another thing that people have to keep in mind. On top of the fact that the offense he was being used in high school was running the triple option most of the time and kind of altered their philosophy for Julian. They threw the ball to him just because he was so good. And he wasn't asked to do a ton as far as route tree goes. Like there was an adjustment for him when he got to Ohio State, and then he gets hurt. And then you look at the fact that Ohio State had crazy receivers ahead of him. Like I think he's a good receiver. Like I think that is full stop. I think Julian Fleming is a good wide receiver. He can block, he can run routes. He's been not on the same page as Drew all the time this year. Obviously, we saw it against UCLA, but he outsnapped everybody else against UCLA. He was those two big play action passes away from having a nearly 100-yard game. He's got good hands. He's been reliable in the big moments.
This close to scoring a touchdown too. This close.
Yeah. I just I think that if you really look at the totality of what Julian Fleming has done so far this year, you got to be really happy. I mean, it's not the 5-star, the prodigal son comes home. Like that's not what it is, but that's not what you were ever going to get. And I think that he's got to be happy with his role. He's playing a ton. And it's tough to take the ball away from Tyler Warren as a safety blanket. Like I just think the best way to put it is that's really been a good experiment this year.
Yeah, and I think just something too that Drew Aller has talked about, James Franklin has talked about, with the way this offense is structured, you're going to have certain guys have big games one week and then be completely seemingly non-existent, at least from a pass catching standpoint. The next, it's all matchups based. It's how Andy Kotelnicki does it. I think that's the best way to go about it, unless you have like a Tyler Warren, maybe, or, if you have like a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase that you just throw it up to and he can go get it. If you don't have a guy like that, you have to play matchup space. And so, we saw Liam Clifford get 3 catches for over 100 yards, against UCLA. Is that going to be Liam Clifford every game? No.
No.
Julian Fleming had a 39-yarder, I believe it was, against Illinois. Is he going to have was it Illinois or was it Kent State?
I think it was Kent State. Kent State.
Kent State. You're right. It was Kent State.
Yeah.
Is he going to have?
He had 2 big catches against Kent State, though.
Yeah. But like, what I'm getting at is he's on the field for a reason. You mentioned he outsnapped every wide receiver, against UCLA. And there's a reason why he's on the field, is because ultimately, despite those miscommunications early in the game, Penn State staff trusts him to run good routes, and they certainly trust him to be a blocker on the outside, which I do think has helped this running game. When you talk about the explosiveness, obviously the physicality up front with the offensive line, I think the tight end blocking has been better, but I think the blocking on the outside with the receivers have been better, and Julian has been a massive, massive part of that.
Yeah. I think that's really the case with him. He's a good, not amazing receiver. He fits this system really well, and he's gotten his job done. So I hope that's what you wanted to hear, John. Let's go to let's stay on the Penn State side of things before we hit the one big picture question we got. So this is from Brent from California, who Johnny wanted to say let's go Mets to you. I wanted to make sure I relayed your message.
I responded.
I don't know if you have a rebuttal.
I responded to Brent on subtext. It's been a nice back and forth. He said "Let's go Mets" to me a couple times. Hey, if you want to subscribe to subtext and chirp me about the Phillies, by all means. We're recording this at 12:41 p.m. on Wednesday. Got a few hours until Game 4. I am not confident at all. Most of you will probably be listening to this after that game is played.
Yep.
I'm expecting the Phillies to go home to Philadelphia as losers. And if they do, good for you, Brent. Thank you for the question. I hope we get Game 5 in Philly. We'll see.
Johnny, I'm a Cubs fan through and through. A lot of people have figured this out by now. Never rooted for Philadelphia teams in any sport in my entire life. I did this year, and so I'll take the blame for them stinking it up in the postseason. But Brent's question...
You're taking over the Dave Jones role.
Brent's question, is Penn State built for bully ball in the way that Michigan was last year? I'm going to send it off to you, Johnny.
I think they are. I just think that they have the mentality. They have the blockers. I think the interior blocking has been pretty good. Nick Dawkins
Hmm.
has bided his time at center and has done well. Sal Wormley is as reliable as they come in terms of number of starts and experience. Bangayon, we've talked about his physicality, as a motioned blocker, but he's a people mover on the inside. And then you've got Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, who, early in their careers, in 2022 when they were true freshmen, the narrative was like a thunder and lightning situation where Katron Allen brings the thunder. He's knocking people over, he's running through tackles, and Nick Singleton will pop the 40, 50 yarder for a touchdown. But I will say, I think Nick has gotten a lot more physical. I think he's
Hmm.
gotten a lot more powerful, and it's not just like a strength thing; it's like a mentality thing. We saw against Illinois when he decleated that defensive end and then caught the pass out in the flat and ran over the dude. But that's just
Yeah.
one example. Like he has been when he's running in between the tackles, he's been lowering his shoulder and getting those dirty yards, as he and Jay Sider, the running back coach, would say. And so I think when you have here's the difference, because I think Michigan lined up and just said, yeah, we're going to run through you. But we also have JJ McCarthy kind of just running a lot of play action and throwing it a little maybe underneath on drags, and they'll take it the rest of the way. I think Drew Aller has a little bit more to him in terms of a downfield passing threat. And so
Hmm.
when you have to worry about that as a defense, keeping safeties back, I think that creates even more opportunity for Penn State in the running game. I'm not saying that Penn State is going to do bully ball or can do bully ball better than Michigan did when they won the national title
No.
last year, but I think it's just slightly different.
Yeah. No, I think you brought up the interior of the offensive line. That's one of those. That's one of those situations. It's almost like a long snapper. Like if you're not talking about them, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And those three starters up the middle have been really freaking good. They're physical. Rucci, like I said, Rucci and Donko. I mean, both of them have been pretty solid in the run game. Drew Shelton is, I think, a little bit more polished as a pass protector, but like he's been there. He's had that left tackle spot all year. He's not losing it. The offensive line is really gelling well. I think Andy Kotelnicki's ideal scheme includes a really athletic offensive line that's able to take those pulls, that's able to down block, that's able to reach guys for that zone running scheme. I think that this group specifically has that. So it looks different than what Michigan did last year. It's not, the mentality is different, like you said, but I do think they're built for it, because you watch that Illinois game, score was 21-7, but like it was never that close. Like it was not a 2-score game. And that's because Penn State went into that game, knew what Brett Bielema wanted to do, which is run the heck out of the ball and beat him at it. Like it's just what they did. They had a plan and they did it. So yeah, I think Penn State is built to run bully ball as far as they want to. Is how I'd put that. So I hope that answers your question, Brent. And then this is our last one, Johnny. This has been great. Appreciate you all on Subtext again. We'll make sure that the link to subscribe is down in our description of this video as well, so that if you want your question featured in the future, you know where to go. But this last one comes from Jeff High, and the question is: midseason, what's your pick for the Big Ten championship game, Johnny? And would you rather play in that game with the risk of injury, whatever, or still make the CFP and be healthy going at it?
So the question is, would you rather play in the game and risk injury and maybe not get in the CFP, or not play in the game and have a guaranteed spot in the CFP?
I mean, if you make the Big Ten championship, you're probably making the CFP no matter what. Let's angle it as: would you rather make it, lose, potentially have some injury issues, or not make it and still have
Yeah.
that spot in the CFP as the 10 through 12 seed?
Yeah, I gotcha. Look, I mean, I get the argument or the thought process behind, not putting your guys at risk. But man, I mean,
Mhm.
banners fly forever, right? So I
Right.
would absolutely want that shot at a Big Ten title, because, even if you don't end up winning the national title. You lose in the playoff after a couple games. I mean, yeah, it would be an accomplishment to make the playoff, and that's ultimately the team's goal is to contend for a Big Ten title and to contend for a national title. And if you can do both, I would risk injury to do both. Ultimately, don't want anyone to get hurt, but I mean, man, if you can play for a Big Ten championship, you play for a Big Ten championship. So that's how I feel, at least. And then my two teams that I'm picking right now. I mean, before the season, I think my picks were Ohio State and Oregon.
That was pretty much everybody's pick.
I know. And they were the odds on, like they were the favorites to win.
For good reason.
For good reason. I'm going to go right now, though, with the way we've seen through 6 weeks of college football, I would go Ohio State and Penn State. I think before the season, I had Penn State at 10-2. I'm leaning more towards 11-1 right now. I just think what they've shown us so far, the bully ball, everything else that we've talked about already, Max, I think they're poised to go in this weekend and beat USC. And if that's the case, I don't see them losing outside of the Ohio State game. And at 11-1, you would think you get in. The one sneaky team, by the way, just to keep this in mind, and I know it might sound insane in terms of picks for the Big Ten title game, but Iowa could easily get to the Big Ten title game. They've lost to Iowa State in the non-conference. Their schedule is incredibly easy. Something to keep in mind. If you haven't already, and you want to get angry, go look at Iowa's Big Ten schedule. It's very, very feasible for the Hawkeyes to get to Indianapolis.
On that same token, Johnny, what about Indiana?
I love Indiana. I love it. Really quick, I pulled it up because I wanted to bring it to the listeners' attention. So, sure. Iowa, in Big Ten play, Iowa has already beaten Minnesota. They lost to Ohio State, which we know. They lost by 28, and it really wasn't that close. But the rest of the way, they play Washington at home this weekend, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland, and Nebraska. Obviously, there's some games in there that they could lose, but they don't have another ranked team on the schedule the rest of the way. Indiana, also very feasible. I mean, they don't play Penn State, USC, Oregon. They do play Michigan and Ohio State, but I mean, if they lined up tomorrow, I'm taking Indiana to beat Michigan. The way that Michigan's playing right now, and the way that Kurt Signetti and those guys, Curtis Rourke, the way they're playing in Bloomington, man, I mean, they are so much. They're just so much fun. And like, I know only like a handful of Indiana fans, but I'm happy for them. I am. But to be doing this in year one is really impressive. And talk about schedule setting up nicely. I think Indiana has a nice schedule too.
I am truthfully not as well versed with the Big Ten tiebreaker right now as I should be. Because they announced it in like August. So, I mean, we were all kind of focused on other things. But the way Indiana's schedule shakes out, I would predict them to win every game except for against Ohio State, which would be a similar situation to what I have for Penn State. So I don't know what the tiebreaker would be there. If they both are one loss in the conference and finish second place, I don't know who goes to the championship. Iowa, I just, you're right. I mean, the defense is going to continue to be good. Caleb Johnson's a good running back.
I don't like Iowa. I want to get this across. I don't think they are like a Big Ten title worthy, participant right now. Yeah. But the schedule suggests that they would have a chance to get in.
Yeah. Just for debate's sake, I'll go Ohio State and Indiana right now. Just for debate's sake, because honestly, I think Penn State and Indiana are both likely going to finish 11-1 this year. Oregon, I wish we could have talked about this. Maybe we will talk about this again next week because of the Penn State USC and the Oregon Ohio State games on the slate. But yeah, just for debate's sake, I'll go Indiana and Ohio State right now. I do think Ohio State's going to go undefeated this year. I think they're really good. But then just to get to the other part of the question, I'm 100% with you, Johnny. I mean, the 12-team playoff has kind of changed some of the conversations we have around topics like this because you do have to gear up to play. What is it? A 17 game schedule potentially. Um, which, I mean, that's a lot. These kids have never been through that before. Your bodies wear down by the end of the season. If you can make it in, you always have a chance. And sometimes being fresh is better than being battered. It's a thing. But yeah, like I mean, even if the farthest sports you've played is high school, like me, like a lot of us, like you understand if your team is on the verge or capable of winning a conference championship, that means something. I think a lot of us would rather even lose in that game than to say we didn't even make it. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I think that answer is pretty clear. You want to play for a conference championship, especially because like when it's your conference, it's the teams you're playing every year. Like you're familiar with the guys on the other side of the ball. Like some of them you went to high school with in college because y'all recruit the same guys. Like
Yeah.
that the Big Ten championship is very important, and yeah, so you want to play in it no matter the circumstances, even with this 12-team playoff is
Yeah.
kind of how I see it.
I mean, would you as would the fans rather, just make sure that Nick and Drew and all these guys are healthy for a home game against Tennessee in the first round of the CFP? Or would you
Mhm.
rather, maybe maybe a couple guys get some bumps and bruises, but you get another shot at Ohio State? Say you lose
Mhm.
at home to Ohio State and it's a close game, and you're like, damn, we're that close, and
Mhm.
you get another shot at them at a Big Ten
Mhm.
title. And also the other thing that we actually haven't discussed, if you win the Big Ten, you're going to be one of the four highest ranked conference champions, and you're going to get a first round bye. So
Right.
you get that extra time off. You don't have to play
Right.
another game. So I think that's a big thing that I don't know how it slipped my mind, but that's a huge thing. That's a
Good
huge thing.
point.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure there were some
Mhm.
listeners listening and being like, they get a bye, they would get a bye if they won. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it would be a big deal. But I love the Indiana story. I think they're going to slip up like outside. I think they actually would beat Michigan, lose to Ohio
Mhm.
State, and they'll slip up elsewhere on their schedule. But still, would be an incredible year for the
Yeah.
Hoosiers. I love. I mean, interesting that we didn't talk about Oregon. Really, I mean, Oregon, they've kind of sleepwalked, and
Mhm.
in the post game video that we did for the UCLA game, I said sleptwalked or sleepwalked. Which one is it? It is
Oh, you looked
sleepwalked.
it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I appreciate
That was really weighing on you, huh?
it was. It was. I appreciate a few. I appreciate a few of the listeners and the watchers on YouTube for, setting me straight in the comments. Oregon has done that,
Mhm.
really through the start of this season, and super intrigued to see. We talked about Ohio State and Chip Kelly might be holding stuff back. Intrigued to
Mhm.
see what Dylan Gabriel, Tez Johnson, and those guys, in Eugene can do this Saturday against Ohio State, because the winner of that game is positioned well to make the Big Ten title game and to get a first round bye in the CFP, and the loser has some serious work to do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The thing with Indiana, here's their keys. The two games that I could see them slipping up in, Nebraska and Washington, they get both of them at home. So
Fair.
that's
Yeah.
that's a big help.
In the quarry, Max.
In the quarry, the
The
Rock,
Rock.
baby. I'm a big Indiana guy, to be honest. Like I almost went to school there for college. I visited there, love the campus. I have family ties in Indiana, so I like to see them do well. It's a fun program. It's a fun town,
Yeah.
and
Well, in the
it's
past, I've had the chance to talk to Kurt Signetti actually a couple times, because when I was covering
mhm,
Pitt for the Post Gazette, there's some serious Pittsburgh ties with the Signettis.
sure,
Former Pitt players were, whether they transferred, to James Madison, or were coaches, assistant coaches at James Madison. So I've had the chance to talk to Kurt a couple times, and obviously a damn good coach, knows what the
mhm,
hell he's doing, and he's a serial winner at every level. And so it is
yeah,
it is really cool to see, what he and the Hoosiers are doing in year one. And look, for the vibes, would love to see it going.
yeah. Yeah, I mean it's always fun to follow an underdog, no matter what sport. I will say I used Indiana for my first college football video game dynasty. 2028 national championship could be going their way, so that's what I'm going for. But this is a fun discussion as far as the Big Ten goes. Which teams we see in it, but the thing to keep in mind is on any given Saturday, Vanderbilt can beat Alabama. So you never really know what's going to happen. But this has been fun, Johnny. Again, appreciate all you guys for your questions. This was a nice little switch up, I think, in the way we podcast every week to kind of open it up to some more big picture questions. But I think that's going to do it for us.